The remains of the 14 South African National Defence Force soldiers killed in the DRC arrived on Thursday. President Cyril Ramaphosa officiated a handover ceremony for the families at the Swartkop Air Force Base. But now the families face the reality of working towards closure, acceptance, and grief. What cultural process will families have to perform for their loved ones to observe mourning? And what does this journey of healing actually look like? Now, co-founder of the great Empire of Kemet, Mkhulu, Nsingiza, and Rites of Passage guide Helena Dolny help us to unpack. And right now we're joined by Helena. Good morning, Helena. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning to listeners.
Thank you for your time. Thank you very much for your time. Before we begin, if you can just explain the various rites of passage, if you can unpack that for our viewers.
So in my own personal experience and in the work of being trained as a grief educator, one of the really important things is that we need our grief to be witnessed. We need it to be acknowledged. And I'm understanding that there is a very caring public reception of the remains of soldiers coming home. So I think that is something that is being done that is very good and is being done really well. One of the things that I would caution against is that this is happening very publicly. And my late husband, Joe Slovo, he had a very public funeral, a state funeral. And one of the things that we need to be aware of is that people often need their private space as well. And it could be that people can't, they're almost like in a holding pattern when they're in the limelight. And it's like an event happening on stage that you're going through, and it's almost like a disembodied experience, and that people will need their privacy. And once that it's not a news item and people are wanting private space, it's still important not to forget them.
Right. So for the benefit...
And then I think that culturally, people do need closure, so the repatriation is really important. I'm so glad that it is being done.
Yeah. For the benefit of our viewers, if you can just explain to us what the various rites of passage are. Of course, with death being one of them, but there are various rites of passage that we observe throughout the course of our lives. Could you take us through the different rites of passage?
So, in terms of death, it will depend culturally, and it will be very different in different cultures. For example, British soldiers are often not repatriated. They have that you will be buried where you fall. Whereas in South Africa, that's very different. I'm aware of people of my generation whose partners, husbands died in Angola 35, 40 years ago, and those remains have not been found and they've never been repatriated, and that closure has been really different. So in terms of a rite of passage, then witnessing and seeing a person and having their remains and being able to bury them is a primary rite of passage. And then a second part of that is that your grief is acknowledged. And a third part of that is that your grief will be respected as taking time and that you need support during that time.
All right. We're now joined by Mkhulu Nsingiza, who joins us virtually. Thokoza Mkhulu, good morning. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Oh, Thokoza Ndlovukazi.
Thokoza Mkhulu. Firstly, could you just explain, Mkhulu, the significance of spiritual rites, especially within an African context?
That is associated with death.
Yes, especially when, in light of the fact that now we have these 14 soldiers who have been repatriated and the families are grieving, and there's still the aspect of lack of closure because, I mean, in light of the fact that they're not able to view the bodies or perform any cultural rites, it's important for us to understand what the significance of these spiritual rites are in the first place.
Yes. It's a gross violation of our cultural rights. People have a right, even though the funeral might be conducted, by the state, but people have a right to do their rituals. Firstly, in understanding, the importance of both the physical as well as the spiritual component of a human being, because we believe that what constitutes a person is the spirit and the body. So therefore, when the spirit has departed from the body, there are certain rituals that must be done to unite before the burial of the spirit and the body. So therefore, if people were not allowed to view nor do cultural rites, it's a violation of the cultural rights of those families. They will never find closure because you'll find that currently their spirit is wandering wherever it departed from in Congo. There was supposed to be a ritual that is done, for each and every deceased person, in the African sense, they've got to be able to transport their spirit, as well. Each and every family should be carrying what we call umpafa or umlahlankosi, to transport, the spirit from Congo until their final resting place. So if none of those have been done, I find it difficult to think that families will have full closure of what has happened. I think a government has violated people's rights here.
And then, Helena, I'd like to bring you in here. Are there any specific cultural or perhaps traditional practices maybe that you've seen help families honor their loved ones and find closure?
Are you talking to me, guys?
To Helena.
Oh.
I'm thinking of the families who are grieving in the year ahead. And I think the first year and the second year are the most important. And if people can map out for themselves what are the anniversaries that are going to happen that are important, if they can make sure that on those special dates that they are not alone. And I think that if people can be kind to themselves and acknowledge their pain, and in their community, if we can understand that people who are grieving, they are often angry, they are often not the person that you knew before, that a person who is grieving is sometimes unidentifiable and they behave differently, and that what we need is, in terms of community, is to be caring and supportive in every emotional and practical way possible.
Mkhulu, I'll come back to you now. If you can just explain, especially for the benefit of our viewers, when it comes to umzimba arriving at the home, the body of the deceased, what are the do's and don'ts that inform whether the body should come and spend the night at the house, at the home, or not? And if you can explain, in this instance, what should be done?
Normally, what happens in Ndlovukazi, if you departed through a violent, act where it's an accident, or you've been stabbed, or you've been, shot, that body is not allowed to come in because ngesizulu sithi izoba umkhokha. meaning that, other people might follow you. So that is why all rituals are done outside. You are not allowed to come in. Yes, during your funeral, they just, wait outside the gate. They don't come in, but everything is communicated to the ancestors to explain the whole situation, the reason why the deceased may not be able to come home, so that they spend the last day with their family. So any person that has departed through violence is not supposed to then come in, because it is afraid that will, start a continuous process of the family, either following, the deceased.
And Mkhulu, what message do you have for the families of these 14 departed soldiers?
I think the message I would have, they must make a demand, from the Department of Justice or government in general. Government has got to fund a trip for all those people to go back to DRC, to go and do rituals of fetching the spirit. This is their right. They were supposed to be accommodated. And not everything is done, in the Western way. In the African way, we are African, country. We should be understanding these things. We should be the ones that came forth and, accommodated, people in this way. So the only way they can do now is to then make sure that they put pressure on government to fund each and every family. Let the representative of that family be flown to Congo to go and, complete the process.
I couldn't agree more. And in closing, Helena, what role do you think that the government agencies such as the Department of Defense or Social Development can play in providing a psychological or even the spiritual support to families?
So for me, it's not just the 14 soldiers who died, it's those who fought with them. And at the moment, I've been traveling in Vietnam, where there are thousands of people who are traumatized by war. They'll be traumatized by pain, they'll be traumatized by nightmares, they'll be traumatized by sleeplessness. People take to alcohol. So the role of deepening the capacity of the SANDF to provide counseling will be really important to those soldiers who have not died, but watched their fellow soldiers die. And they should not be forgotten.